Hi everybody, I hope you're doing marvellously well. We are big, we're bad, and we're back with another Fact Friday. So before we get started, we just want to pay tribute to the absolutely amazing Al Schmitt. Al was an incredible person. He showed us the value in being a good human being as well as a great engineer. He was able to make everybody around him feel good. He always got the best sounds, the best performances. And I don't know if there is a person in our industry that is more loved and will continue to be loved than Mr. Al Schmitt. Al, we will miss you forever. You are an incredible part of our industry. I mean, not only did Al win, I can't remember how many, 27, 28 Grammys? Is it coming on 29 Grammys? He changed people's lives. People worked with him and they talk about it, and they will continue to talk about it forever because it was probably some of their best experiences in their whole life. Al was a giant amongst us, and he will be sorely missed. And we love you, Al, and thank you for everything you did for the music industry and for just everybody who ever met you will have felt your incredible warmth and just what a wonderful human being you were. Thank you, Al. We salute you. So we have a lot of wonderful questions this week in our frequently asked questions segment. But let's start, as we normally do on Fridays, with our guitar of the week. Now, Eric and I were briefly talking, like, what are we going to choose? And I thought, why don't we just choose the guitar that I use probably more than any other single guitar? This is a Yamaha Revstar. This is actually their top of the line one. We have this and we have the entry-level one, which is a gold top. This top-of-the-line one is maybe about $1,400 or $1,500, and it's made in Japan. However, the gold one, which is hanging up there, which we equally use, is about $600 or $700. They all play absolutely superbly. They have this control here on the tone, which is, it's not actually a coil tap. It just changes the EQ to make it a little thinner, which is rather tasty. It's got to be the best playing guitar I own, I think. It's pretty rapid. It's like... You can see with no gain, no distortion. It's really slinky. Factory setup. Just a really, really wonderful guitar. Let's demonstrate the non-coil tap, coil tap. So let's put it back in the standard. Back to the coil tap. It's just got a little twang. Try it as a bridge. That's on the non-single coil, single coil sound. It's always a good tester. Grab the guitar, go from a C and just bend it up 2 tones to the E. And if it's not choking, it's a great sign. Absolutely wonderful. So here it is. It's the Yamaha Revstar. Highly recommend. My friend Graham from Blur also plays one of these, and I think they're actually starting to become quite popular. A lot of players are using them because they're phenomenal sounding. Oh, I love this. So you've got this cutaway here, so you can sit with it really comfortably. I've been told the vinyl record production process differs from CDs, MP3s, waves, etc. due to these formats being able to handle much lower frequencies than vinyl records can. Is this true? And if so, does that mean that I'm high passing at the wrong frequency? I usually high pass my bass guitar and my mix bus at around 30 Hertz with a pretty aggressive slope. That's a great question, but that is a misconception. It's absolutely nothing to do with the production process. I'll give an example. Talking to Jack Douglas and Shelley Yakus, for instance, about stuff like this. Both of them told me that they would have preferred mastering engineers because they would mix in a studio in the 70s with huge speakers and tons of low ends. They were using Pultex and they were boosting 60 Hertz on the kick drum, the bass drum, and they were getting huge low end as a result. Below that, 20 to 40 Hertz was coming up, and they were loving it. And then, of course, depending on the mastering engineer, they would remove a lot of that low end for, as you pointed out, vinyl. There's a couple of reasons. Obviously, super low frequencies on vinyl makes really huge grooves, meaning dub tracks, for instance, reggae songs, didn't really translate very well onto vinyl when there was maybe 20 minutes aside. Those of you that are old enough to remember 12-inch singles will remember that all the dub stuff that you used to buy, that I bought as a kid, was like single songs that were maybe only 4 or 5 minutes long, but on a 12-inch. So there was much wider grooves, and there was so much more low end on those reggae dub tracks on a 12-inch single than there would be on a 45 or, one of 5 songs on an album. So it's physicality. It needed wider, bigger grooves, deeper grooves, I suppose would be a better way of describing it. Yeah, deep cuts, deep grooves. All of this needed to happen. It needed more real estate on the vinyl. So when it came to most records where they had, 15 to 20 minutes aside, there was compromises. You had to wipe off the low end if you're going to stick all of those tracks on there. Plus, super low frequencies could make the stylus, the needle, actually pop out of the vinyl. So if you talk to any major mastering engineer who's old enough to have come through vinyl, through CD, and now, of course, digital streaming, they will tell you that it was CD that was the first time they were able to preserve all of the low end that the mixers were giving them. So this long diatribe is to just basically tell you is those guys, Jack Douglases and the Jamesonas and the Shelley Yakuses, all left a lot of low end in there. And it was the mastering engineer that removed that super, super low end. So I don't think you should make your records any differently because they're going to go on vinyl or not go on vinyl. You should make it sound as amazing as possible. And if you want a lot of low end in there and you want it to sound full and it sounds good to your ears and translates, that's fine. Give it to the mastering engineer and they will master for the format. How do we determine the proper volume when mixing on headphones? I have the Biodynamic DT990s and it's tough to tell sometimes. When I'm listening to music or mixing, the low end is super apparent at low volume. When I turn them up to a moderate or high volume, the high and super high end becomes more apparent and the low end drops out. That's interesting. A couple of things. Typically, low end requires volume. So it's interesting that you're hearing the low end predominantly at low volumes. I mean, that is interesting. Typically, when I turn things down through speakers or headphones, all I hear is I don't hear any full low end. That's probably why if you look at the old receivers, of which I have one behind me, and Marantz over there is a loudness switch on it, which you would push in, and that boosted the low end so that you could listen at quieter volumes and have low end coming in. I do wonder whether it's a mid-range thing that you're talking about. The reason why I say that is, as we get older or younger but have been mixing at high volumes and maybe have some hearing damage, the high mids and the high end start to dip. And so what tends to happen is people mix at much, much higher volumes as they get older than they would before. So when they're younger, they're mixing at lower volumes. They don't need to crank it as loud. They get ear fatigue, obviously, and start turning it up, which can cause hearing damage. But the music doesn't sound exciting to them or as bright to them as it should until they turn it up. So I'm wondering, I don't wish to cast aspersions, but it might be that you might have some moderate hearing damage, that you're not hearing those high mids at lower volumes. Usually the high end and the high mids is something that is more predominant because your ears are more sensitive in that area. However, just to reiterate, as you get older, that area tends to turn down. I find a lot of mixes done by people with hearing damage tends to be overly bright and overly aggressive in the mids, high mids, and the high end, and they miss kind of like digital pops and clicks. I worked with one older mixer who was phenomenal, but he had a young guy sitting operating Pro Tools, and he would ask him, "Did you hear that pop? Is there a pop there? Did I miss that?" And they would check it out because he's not hearing that super high frequency stuff. Yeah, that's interesting. That's not the experience I have. I tend to turn up the headphones to get the excitement level on the low end really, really pumping. Like, I like it louder because I hear the low end pumping. And when I'm doing those live streams over 2 or 3 hours, I do find I've turned it up a little bit because I'm getting a bit of ear fatigue. So all I would say, frankly, and the DT990s are fantastic headphones, wonderful headphones. All I would say, quite frankly, is just monitor at the beginning of the day when you first start working. Just turn it up to a point where everything feels flat and then mark it off. Mark it off on your monitor controller, whatever you're using, your headphone set, mark it off. Make that setting and just be very, very aware if you start turning it up, turning it up, turning it up, turning it up. I know quite a few mixers that have like marks and they know where to recall it every day. I know this SSL and I know there's a halfway point. And if I'm going over it, my ears are fatigued. We were listening today to a mix and I had it at a quarter and then I wanted to listen to it loud. So I turned it up to like the halfway mark, which isn't actually as loud as you think, but it's loud enough. You know, at a quarter, it's like conversational level. You can talk over it. At half, you'd have to talk like this to be able to hear over it. But I can't work at that volume for very long. And if I am working at it for too long, I know that that's not good and that my ears are probably suffering and I'm probably turning down those high mids. So you need to find a place like that. So what I would highly suggest you do is plug in your DT990s, which once again, are fantastic sounding headphones. We have a pair of 1990s, which are wonderful. Plug them in, turn it up at the beginning of the day when your ears are at the freshest, right at the beginning of the day, and just turn it up to a level where you're like, that's nice. That feels balanced. I can hear everything evenly. I can hear the low end. I can hear the mids. I can hear the highs. Nothing is dominating and it's not killing me in volume. And then mark it down and use that as your Bible. Use that as a place when you're playing back. Then what I would suggest you do is if you've got a dim control, set the dim control for about 2/3. Doesn't have to be half the volume, but about 2/3 the volume. And when you're editing, when you're soloing things, when you're just spending some time detailing and looping something, press the dim control. Press the dim control and listen at a lower volume. And then when you play it back, you can take the dim off and listen to the full thing. And before you know it, you'll work for longer. Your ears will thank you for it because they won't be destroyed by high volume stuff. And you will get much, much better mixes. So do that. Mark it off. Mark off on your controller. Okay, so before we wrap up, obviously, please leave any comments and questions below. Once again, let's pay tribute to the incredible Mr. Al Schmitt. I have so many incredible memories of him, like so many of us out here in Los Angeles that got to work with him. The first time I ever worked with him was in 2011. That was the first time he mixed something I recorded. It was an Aerosmith track. And I remember I was with Stephen and Jack Douglas, and we had an orchestra on a song. And it was a beautiful piano, vocal with orchestra. And we all looked at each other and went, this is like an Al Schmitt song, isn't it? This is a song that Al Schmitt should mix. We booked in Capitol, him in Capitol. We went down there. We went down there with him, with the Neve, with the flying faders. It was just beautiful to watch him just always be writing automation, just like writing little fader moves, having everything. The only compression he had on the mix was on the vocal, and I believe it was an LA2A. I want to say it was an LA2A. But anyway, that was the only thing that was getting any kind of compression, and it was just tapping it. Nothing else was compressed, and it was all fader moves, and he was just doing fader moves. And it was beautiful. I mean, it was like listening to the song that I'd recorded, but like being brought to life with subtlety and automation and gentle amounts of EQ. And it was absolutely incredible. I do remember we got out a 47 that Frank Sinatra had used, so Stephen could do a background vocal. I also remember that Phil Ramone was down the hall, and Jack and I went down there and met Phil, and I was completely intimidated. I remember walking into the control room, and he was cutting an orchestra in there, and he's holding a chart up, but he had a pencil behind his ear, and he gets the pencil. He's got a string arranger with him, and he starts like making notes on the chart. And I look at Jack and I went, that's a real producer. And Jack just burst into laughter. We were like, yeah, that's a real producer. Somebody who's sitting there rewriting the chart with the arranger while the orchestra's like, practicing in the other room. It was just like, yeah, next level stuff. And unfortunately, that was only a few weeks before Phil died. But I'm so glad I got to meet him. So glad I got to see him work. And I feel blessed that, I got to be friends with Al and I got to work with him. He always is just a beautiful human being. I think all of us are very shocked. I mean, he was 91 years old, but even at 91 years old, he seemed younger than pretty much anybody I knew or know. And there's no hyperbole that's too much to express just how important Al Schmitt is to the music community. And he'll be sorely missed. And we love him dearly. We love you, Al. Thank you for everything you gave to us. And thanks. So long. Farewell. Please leave some questions down below. Auf Wiedersehen, au revoir. Tschüss. Adios. Adio. Goodbye.